this video, you're going to come along and make dinner with me. And today I was making beef stew slash soup and yeast rolls. So I'm going to start out by making my yeast roll dough. I'm going to warm up the water. I'm not going to boil the water. For the recipe, for the yeast rolls, I have done a video on that. I will add the card to that here and link it down below as well. And if you want to make these yeast rolls, you can go over there and get the recipe and watch that video. They are delicious and they go really well with pretty much anything. Here I'm adding the yeast and I'm going to let it rise, activate. And here's the moment when it all activates. And I think that is the coolest thing. I sped it up. It doesn't happen. Well, it actually does look kind of like that if you're watching it. So here I'm just continuing to make the yeast rolls. I'm doing this first because it needs to rise for 20 minutes or a little bit more. Today I was doubling the recipe and I'm playing around with if I'm doubling the recipe, if I need to let the rise or have the rise time doubled as well. So I'm kind of playing around with that. I did not double the rise time this time and it seemed to work out just fine. But I think next time I will double the rise time and see what happens. Now, the danger of that is over rising it or overproofing it, but there's also a good chance that it's going to make it even more delicious. So I'm willing to take that risk. So I'm just dumping it out on the counter here. I'm going to knead it for the first time. Try not to add too much of that flour into my dough. And then I'm going to put it in my oiled bowl with some olive oil spray on the top. And then I took the advice of a viewer and just put a towel over the top. Now I'm putting it underneath in this drawer underneath my oven. My oven is on to prove it because I'm going to be using the stovetop. Now, this was kind of frustrating because normally I proof my bread on the surface of my oven, but today because I was also making stuff on the stovetop, it didn't work out that way, but it did still end up being okay. It was just frustrating. Now this soup is just a bunch of stuff in a pot. I don't really ever measure anything. I just think about what I have. So today I had carrots, celery, red potatoes, sweet potatoes. I added a little bit of ginger in there because my family's been a little bit under the weather. So I thought to, add a little bit of immune support in there. What else did I add? I added some green peas, some frozen organic green peas that I got from the grocery store. I added some kale from the garden, which was fantastic. And so really this soup can just be whatever you want it to be. Really just add the flavors that you love and it just ends up being delicious. I make this often and I oftentimes make it different every single time. I don't really have a recipe. I can put kind of a recipe down below just so that you guys have kind of a base to go on. And then if you want to ask questions in the comments, I would be very glad to answer them. But really, you just want to make this as yummy as you want. Add as much or as little to it as your preference allows and just kind of go from there. So here, I always do my celery and my onions first in the pot and I soften them a little bit. I feel like that really releases the flavor within the celery and the onion before I start adding everything else. So here I'm just getting my celery chopped up and really whatever size chunk you want is totally up to you. If you like a nice chunky soup or a nice chunky stew, make your pieces nice and big. Now, the larger your piece is, the longer it's going to take to cook. So do keep that in mind. If you're in a hurry and you realize that it's late and you don't have very much time to cook, if you make your chunks smaller, your soup or your stew is not going to take as long to finish cooking because the cook time is going to decrease. Especially with the harder root vegetables, they are going to take the longest in this whole process aside from the bread. And so every time I do this, I kind of look at the clock and say, okay, how long do I have? And how chunky do I want my soup? But really, how long do I have? If I only have a short period of time, then I make the chunks nice and small, but not so small that they're just going to disappear into the broth. So here I'm doing the same thing with the carrots. And, many people will say, make sure that the carrot, like make sure all of the sizes are exactly the same so they cook at the same rate. I really don't worry about that. I don't mind having variations in the cook temperature within my veggies. Like if I get a more crunchy big carrot and then a less crunchy smaller carrot, it really doesn't bother me at all. If anything, I might actually prefer it. It's just going to be a texture difference. And the same here with the potatoes. I'm not really going to worry about whether they are exactly the same size. I am just chopping them. I'm just getting it in the pot, honestly. Just getting it in the pot. So here, all of my veggies are in the pot now. Now I'm adding my spices. I found that this really helps the spices incorporate into my veggies versus adding the broth first and then adding the spices. It just seems to have a more robust flavor, and the vegetables themselves have more flavor. So here I'm just going to let it simmer, and while I'm letting it simmer and the veggies cook, well, it's more like a slow boil, not quite like a simmer. I'm going to clean up my mess and then get ready for the next step in the rolls, which is to oil these pans. These are the pans that the rolls will cook in. And then I forgot that I hadn't added some of the spices, so I run back over to the stove and add some other spices that I have. The most important one that I'm showing here is this beef bouillon. Now, if you want to use beef bouillon cubes, you can. If you don't want to add this step at all and you want to just add a bunch more spices, you can do that. The beef bouillon just adds a real depth of flavor to the broth, but I have done with and without that beef bouillon. So you can really get as spicy as you want in that soup. You can add really whatever you want that smells good and you think it's going to taste good. So here I'm moving on to the rolls, and I'm just cutting them into little roll dough balls, and then I'm going to knead them into cuter, more neat little roll dough balls. And I'm going to put them in the pan. I'm going to spray the top. Now, it's really good if you melt the butter. In this step, I forgot to melt the butter. I just used the spray, but you can melt butter and then brush the butter on top here and then sprinkle the salt on. If you have any kind of dairy allergy, you can just use the oil. Either way works, and either way is absolutely delicious. And I have one little lone dough ball left, and so I put him in this little mini pan all by himself. And here you probably could put like some kind of herbs on the top of the yeast rolls as well. I have never tried that. I want to. I just haven't yet. So here I'm going to cook my ground beef, and I also had some Italian sausage in the refrigerator. And so I figured it would be cool to, or fun or delicious to add just one sausage. And it did. It added a really nice flavor burst. Like anytime you would get an Italian sausage, it was pretty delicious. You really could use any protein with this. I mean, I have a chicken version of this soup, and then I just use like a chicken bouillon, but I do it very similarly, almost all the same vegetables. I am seasoning this beef just to give it an extra bit of seasoning before I add it into the soup. Oh, I'm adding my frozen peas. The longer you wait to add the peas, the less mushy they're going to be, and the more vibrant green they're going to be. So I always wait to add it right till the end because I want them to be that nice vibrant green, and I don't want them to be super mushy. So here I'm just chopping up the kale. I'm going to make it nice and small. I have little ones, and trying to hide the kale where I can. But my little ones do seem to enjoy the kale, especially out of the garden. But I also don't want them to choke on it, so I'm trying to make sure that it's small enough so that that doesn't happen. Now I'm going to add my beef mixture into my soup pot, pot, not a bowl. And I'm just going to mix it around, and I'm just going to kind of let it sit. Now, my rolls were having a hard time rising because they weren't in a warm enough spot. So I removed the soup and then put the rolls right between the two burners that I was just using, and that really helped them rise. Now, the same thing goes with the kale. I like it to be nice and vibrant. I want it to be wilted, but not just completely annihilated. But that is up to you. If you like your kale to be nice and cooked down, add it a little bit sooner and let it actually boil in with all of the other veggies. Now, that other white pan wasn't quite done. I'm going to brush melted butter on the top of here again, and that just makes it so delicious. But you can use oil here, oil of your choice. It could be like a really rich olive oil if you want it to have that flavor. You can use really any oil in that place. It really helps to finish the roll off. It gives it a nice color as well as helps the moisture of the roll. And you could add additional herbs to the top here as well. So now I'm just tasting my soup because I had realized that I hadn't done that yet and realized that it needed just a little something extra. I measure just about everything with my heart, so I just dumped a little bit more in there. I used the coconut aminos and I just put a couple more shakes of that in there, and it was exactly what it needed. And here is everything all finished and looking absolutely beautiful. And here it is plated up. So that's in the bowl with a little roll on the side. And then my mom has always added a little dab of butter and it makes it so delicious. Try it. I hope you guys enjoy. I'll see you next time.